Hello and welcome everyone to today's conversation on coaching challenges, looking at different scenarios and solutions. Very excited to see lots of familiar faces and also some new ones. So this is wonderful. I do unfortunately have you in mute mode. Many of you are familiar. The idea is there's so many people on the call. It's how we manage sound. What I can do is this. We want to make sure we're answering your questions. So you have two choices. You can type a question into the question panel, or if you raise your hand, I will unmute you and you can come on live and ask your question. For those of you familiar with it, great. For those of you unfamiliar with it, in your control panel for the webinar, there's a picture of a hand. Currently, it has a green arrow next to it. If you click on the green arrow, it means your hand goes up. And then it'll show a red arrow, and to put it back down, you click on that. So as we go, feel free to raise your hand if you want to jump in with a question. Otherwise, type it in the question panel. I'll watch that as we go. And for those of you asking, yes, I will put the recording on the YouTube channel and send all of you a link to it. So let's go. We've got 30 minutes, lots to cover. We're going to talk different scenarios and different solutions. We'll look at some logistical challenges, relationship challenges, challenging coachees, and then of course, the whole challenge around coaching competency. We, of course, at the end are going to give you some resources. So starting off, and many of you are familiar with this knowing by the names, at the same time, some of you, this is still new. So let's be specific. What is coaching? From the International Coach Federation, it's a strategic partnership in which the coach empowers the client to clarify goals, create action plans, move past obstacles, and choose what the client chooses. So the whole focus of coaching, very different from mentoring or managing, etc., because it really is about empowering the individual client. So how does that apply in some of the different coaching scenarios that you're running into? So let's bring up a situation. Imagine there's a lack of information or there is misinformation and you're called in to coach. Here's the specific situation. A mid-level manager is promoted. They're not achieving the objectives. The mid-level manager is saying that the peers he now supervises are undercutting him. And I'm sure you've heard this before. The peers are saying that he's a micromanaging dictator. So we've got a complete difference of opinion. So do we have enough information? Do we have misinformation? What's really going on? And how do you handle it? So imagine the company contacts you and says, hey, this is the situation. We want you to work with it. How does coaching fit in terms of being a solution for this kind of situation? So first off, coaching and also group coaching as a tool. So as a coach, you want to have a model for how you're going to function. You want to have a process. For many of you, you've completed training or you're attending training, and that's where you have that from. What you're looking at doing very specifically in that situation is saying, okay, what's going to work for them? How is this going to support what they want to achieve? So you want to define the parameters of what you're going to offer. You, of course, will have a coaching agreement. You've got your code of ethics at play. You also want to get specific in terms of how you're going to share information, because this particular situation can be sensitive in that regard. So once you have your parameters in place for that coaching relationship, let's start digging into how you're going to work with people. Of course, the first thing you want to do is engage in terms of the organization and make sure it's a good match for you to work with everyone. So that means exploring with the client. And in our particular scenario, what we're going to do is say your company is the sponsor. You have a client in this new manager who got promoted. You also are going to be looking at clients in terms of the former peers. So we're going to talk individual coaching with the manager who's in that role, and we're going to talk group coaching with the former peers. So with the manager, newly promoted, you're exploring, okay, what is it for them? What's going on? What do they want to have happening? And how are they going to get there? In terms of the group, it's a similar concept. You're getting them together as a group and saying, okay, what do you want the situation to be? And what are the options for making it happen that way? Now, of course, that exchange of information that you set up ahead of time is so important in this situation because you've got to be having that conversation and making sure you're properly addressing that. What information do you have and how are you getting it? So in an organization, sometimes there are surveys sent out, anonymous or 360s, those kinds of things. And other times it's really the talk. And so the challenge becomes, okay, if we all focus on what the problem is, how are we going to move it forward? As a coach, you go into that individual session with the individual manager and you accept what that manager tells you. You go into the group and you accept what they tell you. Is it your job to decide what's accurate and what isn't accurate? Well, for them, that's what's real. So it's your job to focus them on what do they want it to be and how, in fact, will you support them moving toward that? So imagine in that situation, if you're working with the manager and the group, the former peers, you're addressing conflicts of interest. So, of course, it's incredibly important that you're transparent in terms of what you're doing and what the relationships are. And one of the things many of you are familiar with is the decision tree that's taught in your coaching certification, where as a coach, you're asking yourself, okay, am I going to effectively coach this client? Well, in your case, am I going to effectively coach the client and the group? Or is it something that, okay, one coach for the client and one coach for the group? So you've got some choices there, and you want to be clear with yourself in terms of your capacity. And you also want to be clear with the people you're working with, both the individual and the group. Hey, could this be perceived as a conflict? Of course. And so having that conversation and making sure everyone's on board, if you in fact say, yeah, I can work with both, I want to be transparent. So set yourself up for success by having those conversations on the front end. Then, in terms of moving into that engagement, of course, you want dedicated time for the conversations. So with the individual, you're scheduling sessions. Now, with the peers, the former peers of that new manager, one of your challenges is going to be a dedicated meeting space. So the manager probably has a room where you can go and they can have a private conversation. For the others, that may or may not be the case, and you've got to ensure the confidentiality of the conversation. Now, as a coach, sometimes you're meeting with them virtually in an environment like this. And then, of course, you're choosing a technology and, hey, do we want webcams or those kinds of things? Other times, you're actually meeting face-to-face using a conference room, etc. In any case, wherever the people are for the different sessions, make sure it's private and confidential. Then moving into how you're handling it on an ongoing basis, yeah, you're going to have your standard forms, a master service agreement with the organization. You'll have a coaching agreement with the individual you work with and a group coaching agreement with everybody else. And a question pops up, how do you prevent someone in the group from recording it? Fabulous question. So yeah, technologies where you meet online, etc., are designed where it's whoever hosts can control it. At the same time, there are things people can do to attach to something to record it without you knowing it because they're recording it from their computer. Alternatively, if you're in a conference room, oh my goodness, how easy is that for somebody to have a device that's recording and you don't know? So the theory is we have everybody agree. The reality is it possible for someone to record it? That's a challenge. And that's where having an agreement for the group of, hey, this is confidential. there's no recording of it, we're simply having the conversation, etc., is going to make the difference, and have everybody sign off on that. Now, is that going to prevent it from happening? Ideally, because they've signed their name to that. Alternatively, realistically, do we know for sure? Not necessarily. And the people in the group are going to be aware of that, and it can play in. So their comfort level with it being confidential is going to make a huge difference in terms of how productive you are. Now, as far as notes go, if you're working with a manager, for example, and they want notes from the conversation, great. Be sure the notes are confidential. In other words, they're on a privately owned computer, not a company-owned computer. And if you do email notes to the individual client, they're on a personal email address, not a company-owned email address. Now, the same is going to be true of the group. And think about it this way. If you email notes to the group on a company email address, those notes are owned by the company and the manager is going to have access to them. So it's incredibly important you're very cognizant of all of these pieces. So reports themselves. What reports go out and who do they go to? Well, back to what we were saying earlier, it's incredibly important to establish the exchange of information on the front end. So, for example, if the manager's supervisor or boss wants to know what's going on with the manager, what you do is you work with that manager to co-create a report that goes to their supervisor or boss. If you're working with a group and a boss wants a report, same thing. You work with a group in terms of creating the report and submitting it. Because bottom line, you've got to have permission from each person as far as what information gets passed on, etc. So another question came in, and these are great questions. If you're using the client company's premises, are you going to know in advance the company's policy in terms of usage of phones for pictures and recordings? Great point. You definitely want to do that. Some companies are super strict and they have ways of monitoring it, and other companies have a policy without any way to monitor it, etc. So knowing that, having that conversation is going to be important. And it's establishing, hey, this is what all of us here are agreeing to. Okay, how long is the engagement going to be? Well, in the particular conflict we're talking about, you're probably establishing a set number of sessions on the front end in terms of having the conversations moving forward, etc. So be cognizant of that, and in planning it, be thinking about how you're maintaining the focus on moving forward, on what's going to happen. So really good points. Oh, and another question on video monitoring with security systems. So yeah, this is great. There are so many questions, and these apply in the scenario we're talking about and apply in all coaching situations. There's so much technology available for recording audio, video, etc. How do we manage that? And of course, a big part of it is asking the questions, having the conversation, and then also the agreement with everybody where we all sign off and say, this is what we're agreeing to. Is there a 100% guarantee? No. Can we do as much possible to protect that? Absolutely. And that's what we're after. Okay, let's move into another kind of situation. Let's say you have a manager and they want an employee coached as a corrective measure. Now, of course, this used to be more common. In today's world, it's less and less common because coaching is a big investment. At the same time, it does occur in 12% of the engagements where the company is hiring a coach. Now, the manager says, oh, I want to tell the coach all about everything, and I want reports after all of your coaching sessions, etc. So you're all seeing all the red flags come up right on the front end. And then, of course, the employee is going to be telling the coach secrets. Yeah, scary stuff. Okay, so what do you do? How do you handle these kinds of situations? First off, be aware of the conflict on the front end. And one of the things for those of you who have done coach training that you learned at the Center for Coaching Certification is how to manage conflict. Sometimes that happens right at the front end. So there's a conflict between this manager and their employee. So imagine using the Center for Coaching Certification STOP conflict model with the manager and the employee. And this is before we get into any individual coaching. We're going to deal with this conflict. Now, sometimes you schedule a session with both of them there. Sometimes you work through this conversation with each of them individually. And the process is each person gets a chance to tell their story. Now, if you're working with them together, your challenge is who gets to talk first. And you want to make very sure it's a neutral process for choosing who gets to talk first, because otherwise there's an appearance of taking sides. So in a case like this, I'll say, let's flip a coin or something like that. And we'll have somebody share their side of the story first. Now, of course, the other person probably isn't hearing much of it. What does happen is as the coach listens, they rephrase what the individual says to confirm understanding. And the other person can hear the rephrasing of the coach. And then once the first person is done giving their side of the story, then the other person gets a chance. And what the coach does is turn to that person and say, okay, pretend like I haven't heard anything. In your own words, tell me what's going on. And then the same concept, rephrasing it so the other person can hear it. Now, once each of them have told their story, you're going to move into the next step. Now, I want to back up for 1 second. If you're working with them individually for this conversation, after they tell their own story, you want them to put themselves in the other person's shoes and tell that person's story. So I may say to the manager, okay, tell me what's going on. And the manager tells me their story and I rephrase it. And then I say, now pretend like you're the employee and tell me the story from that person's perspective, and vice versa. Because either way, we want to make sure both stories are out on the table. And then your T is the list of topics. Okay, what are the specific concerns to be addressed, and choosing the order in which to address them. At that point, you move into designing options, brainstorming. And it's very important that each person have multiple options. If you're doing it together, you make sure all options are accepted from either one of them. And then afterwards, you'll say, okay, which ones do you want to focus in on? What's going to work for everybody? And you decide which one to go with. If you're working with them individually, have them brainstorm options and then say, okay, now pretend like the other person is here. What options will they put out? And that way, again, pulling in both perspectives. And from there, you move into a plan. If you have both of them together, they're working through the plan of who's doing what and when and how to make the option work. If you're dealing with an individual, very often their plan is how they're going to approach the other person outside of this coaching conversation. So that's your process. And another question came in, corrective coaching as part of a cultural shift toward the how besides the what. So yeah, the challenge with corrective coaching is people get stuck on what the problem is instead of how to move forward. Now, high performers and transition, 38% of the time, that's the reason for, 48% of the time, according to the Harvard Business Review, that's the reason a company hires a coach. They're a high performer and they're developing their skills, they're dealing with transition, those kinds of things. So much, much more common. All right, let's keep going. So in our scenario, the supervisor wants details. What do you do as a coach? First off, setting the expectations in advance is incredibly important. What information can and cannot be exchanged and how, what the level of confidentiality is. One of the great things for all of us as coaches is having this code of ethics from the International Coach Federation, and we say, hey, I'm accountable to this code of ethics. And it's perfect. Now, you also have the option of co-writing a report with the individual client. Some of you have seen the white paper we have available on how to start and run an internal coaching program, and it talks about that, and it gives an example of this report. And the report very simply has columns. Okay, what is the objective or the goal in terms of what's going to be accomplished? What are the actions? And then what are the notes on how it's going? And when the coach creates this with the individual, then that individual gives permission for that report to be shared. And so that's how you manage the confidentiality, and only the report gets shared. Now, of course, it is important, if you're only coaching the individual employee, that you still have a conversation with the supervisor. And it may not be a formal coaching relationship. You will find when you're hired by a company to coach people inside the company, there is often additional time involved for these types of coaching conversations, setting up the coaching engagement, the process, and how it works. And so that may become part of the process. It's a very informal application of your coaching skills. Now, as far as the individual, let's say they get hung up on sharing damaging information about the manager or the supervisor. Well, first off, as a coach, the only time that confidentiality is not protecting something is if there's a threat of harm or an unreported crime. Now, of course, the other challenge is this. If that person is so focused on telling the secrets, are they really going to be moving forward? So as a coach, your challenge is to say, okay, so I'm hearing these different things have been going on. Okay, great. Now, what do you want it to be? Where do you want to go with this? How are you going to make this happen? What's going to work to move you forward? And engage them on what they can do. In class, we talked about that shift to being proactive and take the time to do it. We've also, one of the things I've often said as a coach, it takes more time, more skill, and more patience to have somebody figure it out. It's also how you get the long-term result. So keep asking questions of that individual. Examples of this, hey, if you're going to create change, what do you want to change? What resources do you have? How will you move forward? Focus them on moving forward. So pull all of this together. What's the coach doing? They're creating awareness. They're using clear and direct language with their questions and with their rephrasing. They engage them, the individual, the group, etc., in discovering solutions. And ultimately, the coach goes in without an agenda. They're open to not knowing what the outcome's going to be, because their job is to support those individuals finding their answers. All right, let's keep going. Let's imagine some challenging coachees that you're dealing with. I'll give you 3 and then we'll talk through them. Imagine you have a coachee who's stuck in this drama. They wanted to get a promotion, they didn't get it, and they resent that. A different situation. You've got an employee who says, it is everyone else's fault, not mine. Or you've got an employee who was promoted and lacks confidence in their own abilities for that promotion. So what do you do as a coach? Let's go through. Stuck in drama. First off, you're going to listen and clarify. So whatever it is they're saying, you're going to listen to what they're saying about the situation. Because here's something we know. Until somebody feels they have been heard and understood, they're not ready to move forward. So they want to be heard and understood first. And then as a coach, be very direct. Okay, that's what it was. That's what happened. Now what do you want to do? What are your opportunities? Where do you want to go and how do you want to get there? And of course, it's about those powerful questions to explore with them. If they do want the promotion next time around, what do they want to be doing to increase the possibilities of earning that promotion? Move them forward. Now, if you have the individual with the lack of ownership, hey, it's not me, it's everybody else out there. Okay, I'm hearing that's where you're at. Now I have a question for you. if the others believe it's you and you believe it's all of the others, where do you want to go with this? Do you want to stay in that stuck spot, in other words, or where do you want to go? And so what you're doing is challenging them and expanding their thinking. Instead of focusing on whatever the problem is, start focusing on what the solution is and explore different possibilities. If we spend time staying stuck in that issue, we're going to stay stuck. So move it forward. Now, the lack of confidence. What do you do there? Well, one of the techniques we often use in coaching is to review their skills as an individual and review the successes they do have. They got the promotion for a reason. Explore the resources they have available to them. Find some quick wins in terms of actions and goals that they can achieve, and plan with them their long-term process, because as they develop their strategies for the long term, they are also developing their confidence. So all different techniques, ways we can do that. Now let's move into coaching competency. You see, interestingly enough, people ask the question, does a coach really have to be trained? Now, I do recognize the majority of the names here, so most of you have been or are going to be trained, and you're understanding that. The reality is coaching is still an uncontrolled profession, and people are asking that question. And my question back to you, and help me out, everyone, tell me if this is a hard question to be asking, and is that hard in a good way or not? My question is, what professional are you going to hire to provide the level of individual service we talk about in coaching who has no training? Are you willing to hire any professional to provide this kind of service when they haven't had training for how to do it? Think about it. Do we question whether or not an attorney should be trained, or a financial planner, or anyone else? Of course not. So yes, it makes sense. Now, as coaches, for those of you that have that training, let it be known. And increasingly what we're seeing is companies are saying, we want membership in the International Coach Federation. As we put proposals out there, as we talk to individual clients, we're hearing that more and more often. And the membership in the International Coach Federation, that's 60 hours of training. So there's a very specific parameter to that. Okay, when you think about competency in this regard, what's it going to be based on? So looking right to the International Coach Federation, you've got your competencies, 11 of them in 4 categories. So what does that tell you? A coach has got standards, ethical guidelines, and professional standards. And when we're members of the ICF, we're accountable to that code of ethics. And we also are expected to establish the coaching agreement, both by having those conversations we talked about earlier in terms of the parameters and confidentiality, et cetera, and by having a written agreement. So our training as a coach prepares us to effectively set the foundation for this coaching relationship. Then, in terms of the relationship itself, engaging and really working with somebody, it's important we establish trust. And yes, that starts with that confidence, that code of ethics, that agreement, etc. Very, very important. And as a coach, you're training in how to work with different people based on who they are, and to truly be present and in the moment with them. That's how you're effectively co-creating the relationship. Next, communicating effectively. Sounds like a no-brainer, right? At the same time, think about it, the active listening. Most of us think, yeah, I'm pretty good. And then when we really dig in, we go, wow, I'm really missing some things. The powerful questioning, coaching questions are very different than any other type of question. And so using them effectively. And the direct communication, clear, positive, respectful, absolutely makes a difference in terms of outcome. And there's specific how-to for coaches that are different than any other type of professional. The next category of competency is facilitating learning and results. That means creating awareness, and that's because you develop the rapport with them and do the exploration with your questions. They're designing their actions. You're planning and goal setting together, both how you're working together in this coaching relationship, how you're supporting their strategies, and then checking in on progress, celebrating successes so you're effectively managing that accountability. All right, what does all of this mean to you? Well, those of you who have the coach training, many of those concepts in terms of how to deal with the different challenges and solutions come right out of your materials from the program. You've got that. So start looking at that and going, how do I use this? How do I apply that? How does it work for me? For those of you thinking about this, yes, the coach training is going to support you doing it effectively. If you're with a company or an organization that looks at hiring coaches, ask them about their coach training, ask them about their experience, what they bring to the table, so that you are working with them to make sure it's a good match. Now, I mentioned I was going to share a couple of resources with you. I do realize we're at our time, so very quickly for you, do check out coachfederation.org. This is the gold standard in coaching in terms of training programs, requirements for members, the code of ethics, the competencies, etc. Of course, very interested in having you check out the Center for Coaching certification and what's available to you as far as coach training. And then the Center for Coaching Solutions. If you are a company or an organization that engages coaches, we've got lots of trained coaches available for you. Additional resources. So we publish new blogs every week right on the website. Each year we publish a book. The chapters in the books are written by graduates of the program. And it's great because you get expertise from all different ranges in terms of work areas, professions, industries, etc. So excellent. And then, of course, the free webinars we do each month. We're available to you if you want to do a quick check-in. Hey, I got a question. Yeah, call, send an email. We want to be available to you and support that. If you are looking to outsource services, we help start and run coaching programs. We're interested in providing a proposal on training for internal coaches, and then, of course, providing coaches where you want that. So what's next for you? First thing, many of you have seen this one before. What I do is, for those of you that are exploring and new, we want to make available to you the opportunity for a free consultation. So I'm going to email you a link to the recording. Just reply to the email and let me know. I'll send you a link to my calendar and you can schedule time. And then from there, you're choosing the resources that work for you, planning your process, implementing your strategy, and achieving your results. So thank you all very much for being here. Definitely appreciate your interest and your time today. I've got a couple of you already typing notes, so you're glad that this is useful to you. Thank you for that. Really good to have all of you here. I'm going to go ahead and close this out, load the recording on YouTube, and get an email to you. So thank you all. Thank you for those comments, and we look forward to being in touch and of service in the future. Thank you.